So Donald Trump will not be getting the Nobel Peace Prize anytime soon, but he is going to have to settle for a Richard Nixon Award. And yeah, I said that out loud. Donald Trump is now going to get an award from a guy who said, "I am not a crook." And what's ironic about that is, by Trump's standards, Richard Nixon really doesn't look like much of a crook these days. But I'm going to be reading this article here from MeidasNews.com. We're going to be talking more about the parallels between Nixon and Trump. But before we do that, I want to thank y'all so much for helping us to build this platform. We've crossed over 850-some thousand subscribers now. We're on the road to 1 million. So if you haven't hit that button, be sure to hit it and help us get to 1 million. And I do appreciate y'all so much. So here it is, folks. This one was written by Troy Matthews over on MeidasNews.com. Trump settles for a consolation peace prize given to war criminals. Trump just received the Richard Nixon Architect of Peace Award. This is so ridiculous. So, Trump will take home a peace prize in 2025, but it's far from the one that he was hoping for. Trump is the official recipient of the Richard Nixon Foundation's Architect of Peace Award for 2025. Former winners of the Nixon Peace Award include such noted titans in peacemaking history as Henry Kissinger twice, Donald Rumsfeld, Newt Gingrich, Dick Cheney, and George W. Bush. Folks, that is the type of company that Donald Trump keeps these days, although I would say he's worse than all these people combined. But yeah, no peace prize for him. He has to take the one that was given to these other war criminals. So here we go. It could not be more ironic that after losing the Nobel Peace Prize, which he so desperately wanted, Trump is forced to settle for an award named for a disgraced president that has previously been given to architects of needless wars, global war crimes, American-backed despotism, and torture. And yeah, that's where Donald Trump's at today, and that is the type of company that he keeps. He will be mentioned alongside of people like Richard Nixon. However, I would say that he's way worse. And I just think back on my childhood, because I've talked a lot here on the channel about how that I've talked politics my entire life. And back when I was a kid growing up in the 80s and then a teenager in the 90s, I used to have two uncles who was on opposite sides of the political fence. Although near the end of my Republican uncle's life, he switched over and started voting the other way, so Thanksgivings weren't quite as entertaining because they weren't sparring anymore. They were on the same side, and instead of sitting there arguing about politics, now they're comparing what to do to take care of certain aches and pains and ailments and how to get rid of the gout. But I remember being a kid back in the 80s and hearing them argue politics, and Richard Nixon was a sore spot for my Republican uncle. He was also ammunition that my Democratic uncle could use in the arguments. Well, you're the party of Nixon. And Nixon was a disgraced president. And even my Republican uncle had to own that. And he would. He would own that Nixon was a crook. He would own that he had been disgraced. That's back when Republicans had some accountability. And that's back when Republicans would actually stand up to wrong. I mean, it was Richard Nixon. It was Republicans that, got rid of Richard Nixon. It wasn't Democrats. That's why today when people scream, Democrats should impeach Trump, I'm like, well, we have to have Republicans come on board to do that because they're in the majority. They're in control at the moment, and they're absolutely giving in to Donald Trump on every corner. But there was a time when Richard Nixon was viewed as a disgraced president, and even Republicans couldn't defend him. I want you to think about how far we've fallen as a country. If we could go from accepting the fact that Richard Nixon was a disgraced president to having Donald Trump as our president for a second time after being disgraced before. It's absolutely crazy to me that we have made this big come around full circle, and the Republican Party has completely sold out any morals, any values, any principles, or any respect for the Constitution or any respect for a rule of law that they once had. Once upon a time, they stood up against Richard Nixon. This go around, they're all Trump loyalists. They're all right there to do whatever it is that Trump wants to do. And I just remember those arguments as a kid, and I remember how that my Republican uncle would try to keep the attention on Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. He would try to keep the attention there, and let's forget about Nixon. Let's not talk about that. And then we go through the Clinton years, we go through another Bush term, then we get Obama, and I'm saying to myself, okay, we did it. We elected the first black president, so this is progress. We're going to go further. And I thought, okay, now we'll elect a woman next, and who knows what. We'll be able to continue to progress and move forward. But the pendulum swung a completely different way, and I do believe it's because people could not stand to be led by such a smart, intelligent black man who they realized was stronger and more knowledgeable than they ever could be. And so we had this kickback against that, and we're still feeling the effects of it today. And now we have Donald Trump reelected, and he has got everything that Richard Nixon ever dreamed he could have had. Richard Nixon would have loved to have had immunity. Richard Nixon would have loved to have had everything stacked in his favor. He would have loved to have been able to go out here and just make all these demands. And that's what he was trying to do. Don't get me wrong. Nixon was going for it. Nixon was going for what Donald Trump is doing today. And Richard Nixon was a crook. I'm in no way giving him a pass. He was a crook. So was Reagan. So was George H.W. Bush. The Bushes. They're all, Dick Cheney. They're all crooks. We know that. But they were going for it, and they definitely helped lay the groundwork for it. But Donald Trump secured everything that Richard Nixon really wanted. And if you go back and study Nixon, when you see Trump going after Jimmy Kimmel, and you see him going after social media influencers, and you see him going after television shows and things like that, I know it seems crazy, but Nixon was doing the same thing back in his day. He was going after the show All in the Family. There's tapes on YouTube. I can't share them for copyright reasons, but if you look up, Nixon and All in the Family, there's leaked audio of him talking about All in the Family behind the scenes. Richard Nixon realized what All in the Family was. It was satire made to expose the stupidity of his beliefs, and he says so. He says, hey, this show, they're making us look terrible. This guy, this Archie Bunker character, he makes us all look like a bunch of idiots, and he's really upset and trying to figure out how he can go about getting it off the air. The only difference is, back in those days, he had people around him who would kind of rein him in, and they wouldn't allow him to do these things. And this day and age, we have Donald Trump, who has immunity from the Supreme Court with revenge and retribution on his mind, and no adult in the room to stand up to him and speak out. And in my mind, Donald Trump was the second disgraced president in American history, alongside Nixon, and I feel like he was a worser disgraced president, because he is the president behind January 6th, and that will always be a completely unforgivable thing for me. I don't care what he did before, and I don't care what he did after. To me, January 6th is Donald Trump's legacy. That's who he was, and that's how I will always remember him. It's how I will always explain him to my kids and grandkids. If I live to be an old man and I got grandkids and great-grandkids that ask me who Donald Trump was, he was the insurrection president. He was the president that pardoned criminals. He was the president that turned criminals back out onto the street. He was the president who weaponized ICE and weaponized the National Guard against his own people. I will never shut up talking about what he was and what he meant to this country. He's everything that Richard Nixon dreamed of being. He just managed to be able to pull it off and get everybody around him to make his illegal acts legal. It's absolutely crazy that we've came this far in this country, and I sometimes wonder what my two uncles would think if they were still here, because they're no longer with me, and I don't get to hear their back and forth banter anymore, although, like I said, they ended up on the same side eventually. And that's what happens when you face old age and you face life. I've seen so many people in my lifetime come around to being on the Democratic side of things when suddenly their health fails and suddenly they need to have help themselves. Then it's like, wait a minute, what about these programs how can I get some help? I need it. And so, they're no longer with me to have those conversations. But while they had differing viewpoints, I do want to drive this point home. They were reasonable men who had reasonable arguments. And they were reasonable men who saw through the bullshit of Donald Trump and didn't fall for it. And so I'm glad about that. And I know that there's more people out there that haven't fell for it. So we will keep pushing forward, and we will record Donald Trump. And congratulations to Donald Trump on getting this award, because those are the type of people that he needs to be name dropped right alongside. And there's a couple of others I could think of, but we won't go there. You can just fill in the blanks yourself.